Hi guys, and welcome to Watt Single Track. On today's episode, we are going to be reviewing and going over the S20, my initial impressions, the good, the bad, and would I buy it. I think it's a great wheel, but there's definitely some flaws that need to be addressed. I just want to give a huge shout out to my sponsors up in Canada, Bradley and Lucas, for taking care of me and providing me the wheel to test in this video. So right out of the gate, we're taking the S20 up some good hill climbs. I gotta see how it does on the usual hills that I ride on my RST all the time. So here is a really steep hill. It's hard to see off the camera, but the S18 struggled to make it up this hill, if it even could make it up it when I could keep the momentum up. But if I lost momentum on the S18, I was not able to continue accelerating up this hill. With the S20 here, the torque is actually really good. I'm fairly impressed. It feels to me about 85, maybe 90% of the torque of an RS, but it's definitely not quite the same, but it is there, and I was able to stall on that hill and then come to a pause and keep accelerating up, and that was a nice change versus the S18. And so here we're just taking it down some downhill and checking out the brakes, and this is usually a really lumpy, this is a horse trail, so this is a really lumpy road, and the S20 shock, you can see it just jumping and kicking, doing its thing. I'll move into that part now. I guess the suspension on the S20 is it's really good suspension. I was super impressed with it. So I'm taking it through a technical line here where I take my RS through, and I used to take my S18 through all the time, and the S20's taking it like it's not even there. These rocks don't even really phase this thing, but sometimes they do phase the rider, and sometimes you screw stuff up. Right there I got kicked sideways, and I don't know what's up, but the S20 seemed to have a magnet for that tree and pulled me right into it. So accidents happen. You're gonna screw up. Just roll with it and move on. And so during this review video, I take the S20 through some rock gardens. I take it through some plain Jane trails that we would all ride. Take it through some really mild single track. And then at the end, I take the S20 through some rock crawling, and I promise you it is worth it to see what this thing is capable of, to watch till the end and see what the S20 can do when you send her through some rocks, because it is quite a capable wheel rock crawling, but that is what exposed its biggest flaw. Now we're going to kind of talk about the good and the bad about the S20, or at least my opinion of the good and the bad. Right out of the gate, I will start off with a few things. The rim, I am super impressed with. The rim is super beefy. I don't think there is another rim out on the market right now that even compares in terms of how beefy it is. So really impressed for this thing when it comes to high-speed rock smashes on the trail and not blowing a rim, which is crucial. Because if you've ever had to hike a wheel out of a trail a couple miles, it sucks. So really impressed with that. The next good thing that I really want to talk about, but I'm on the fence about, and I'm not quite sure what to make of it because it did create some weird behavior, is the hull-less hull sensor. I think it's good in terms of we shouldn't have hull sensor failures anymore and a potential cutout crash while riding, but at the same time it does create a different feel to the motor in terms of how it reacts. I guess it's not drastic to where you can't adjust to it, but it definitely isn't the exact same feeling as a true hull sensor motor. But other than that, I'm happy that Kingsong made those improvements with the hull sensorless technology. So that's great. And then we'll move into battery size. The current battery size The S18, we all know, was not adequate at all. It could not even keep up battery-wise, and I could smoke the S18 battery in about 15 to 20 miles tops, no problem. The S20, I think for trail riders like me, I'll be seeing probably about 35 to 40 miles out of this wheel, which is really good. Though I don't know, because Kingsong does start throttling power as you get deeper into the power curve. But in general, I do think that this wheel will be on par with a RST in terms of off-road battery. Probably going to actually be able to go a little bit further. So that part is really awesome, and I'm impressed with. But here we will move to at least some of the cons, one I'm saving for the very end during the rock crawling segment. But the biggest con that I have with this wheel is obviously the handle, and that's been addressed. They're coming out with a new handle that's 4 times stronger so that you don't break that front bumper handle. The tire, the tire is decent off-road, though I will say when you get the tire leaned on edge, it does not have much bite on the edges of the tire, and I did slide out quite a few times on this thing when I leaned it over too far, just because the stock tire doesn't quite have the grip on the edge that I'm used to from riding the Shinko 241 dirt bike tires. So that can be an adjustment thing, but trying to ride it like I would ride my own wheel, and I did lose it a few times when I leaned it too far sideways. But again, that's really not crucial. The tire overall, I'd probably give it a 7 out of 10 for the dirt, so it's a good tire. There's no need to replace it right out of the gate. I would rock it until it's bald and then look into something else. And I guess now we will move on to my biggest gripe and complaint with the S20 is the battery packs are the same style as the S18, and they were known for breaking nickel strips, especially doing stuff like this and rock crawling your S18 or your S20. You could easily break the nickel strips in the pack, and then the charger would go green at 70%, and yeah, then you're buying new battery packs. So here's the rock crawling segment to the S20, and that first line wasn't quite clean enough. Boom, I tried it again, and it still didn't work out. So overall, the S20 does a great job rock crawling. It is a bit of a top-heavy wheel, but you can see you can easily get that fine motor control and balance on it. And so, yeah, here's another crash. Just trying to figure out the new pedal width of the S20. It's definitely different. It's a super wide wheel, so you probably will clip pedals a few times trying to adjust. But the S20 suspension is amazing, and it makes all this stuff buttery smooth, really easy on your knees and back. But I will get to, it has the biggest flaw, is the oil reservoir chamber. We need some type of roll cage on it. I accidentally broke the oil reservoir cap on the S20 shock, and I had to return the wheel to EVs, and needless to say, that wasn't the best experience. So this is the video where I broke the shock cap. The wheel ends up falling into a rut pocket, and it just spins and shoots off down into some rocks. And during that process, at some point, it broke the cap off. So, yeah, that part about the S20 to me is a crucial flaw that does need to be addressed. I think it's something that's very fixable. Kingsong could build some type of little metal cage that goes over it that screws into both shock arms. The suspension is like super beefy on this wheel, and the suspension arms themselves are about 2 to 3 times the size of the S18 arms. So you could easily be able to screw or add an additional cage in them to protect that oil reservoir, because going with the bigger coilover shock, There is not a shock that will replace this one that I can find that does not have that reservoir on it that makes it exposed and vulnerable in a crash. So we will finish out the video just kind of talking about, in general, would I buy this wheel? So I kind of have a mixed opinion on that. Yes, I would buy this wheel, I think, for about 95% of the public. I don't think that maybe the top most extreme riders will like it for everything, but I do think that maybe if Kingsong revisions a few things, maybe comes out with a better control board that they can allow full power through without throttling the power because of the 12 MOSFETs and burning up control boards, then they might win over the most extreme crowd. But the suspension, it's so nice. It's super beefy and robust, and it doesn't have the rubbing issue that the S18 had. So yes, I really want to buy this wheel. It was so much fun to have my suspension back and to be able to just smash into rocks and not worry about stuff. But at the same time, the battery concern, battery. The vertical stack batteries with the really weak spot welds onto some very thin nickel strips. A lot of riders, including myself, were breaking S18 battery packs, and this battery is designed the exact same way. So that is a huge concern of mine, and that is actually probably, if the battery design was different, or they have reinforced nickel strips and more heavy duty spot welds, I would actually buy this wheel hands down right now. I do like it that much, but at the same time, the major concerns of the battery for me are there. The shock being exposed, that's a concern for me, and the other number one concern for me is not being able to have access to 100% of the power from a dead stop. I don't want to have to roll 3 meters or 9 feet before I can get full power out of the S20, because there's plenty of times on trails I come to a stop, rock back and forth, and then continue on, and then that resets my power curve, and yeah, that's just a no-go. But it is a good wheel for most people out in the community, but there are a few things that are probably going to be holding it back for me from actually buying it. But in general, I would say this is probably a solid 8 out of 10 wheel. It is really good. It does have major concerns. I do think it's a little bit fragile, like things like the headlight, the little plastic things to support the pads tend to fall off. But these are all little petty things, but they do add up. On top of that, the wheel is very squeaky and noisy, even when you do add shock oil or stanchion oil. I think that's just kind of the way that suspension wheels are, because you're having moving parts, and there's no way to get around having squeaking and rubbing with the types of forces that these things are seeing. But overall, if they could address the battery concern for me, I would probably, if they could address the battery concern and address the full power being throttled for the first 3 meters, I would absolutely 100% say buy this wheel, and I would buy it myself. But for the hardest riders out there, I would say you may want to hold off on this wheel for a minute and see if there's any revisions that are done by Kingsong. But for the rest of everybody, I think this will be a fantastic wheel. If you're using it as a street commuter, you're going to be stoked. You're going to have a cush ride. Just want to give a huge shout out to my sponsors again, EVs. Thanks, guys. See y'all next time.